This meeting is being recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's session. I'm Laura Proctor with Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. I'm more than happy to welcome Jane and Premila through WomanACT. Jane is a project coordinator with WomanACT, where she engages survivors of gender-based violence and community agencies to transform policies as well as programs. Welcome, Jane. Welcome, Premila. She has worked in the violence against women sector in multiple jurisdictions, as well as projects, including the criminal justice and legal sector, shelter services, and crisis and community services. Welcome to today's session. So I'll pass it over to these ladies this afternoon.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you for everyone who was able to join us. It's been an incredible day so far, but we're really excited to share a couple of projects that we hold really close to us, and as well as we're so lucky to have two of our current project advisors also sharing their insights. So I'll just do kind of like a brief introduction as to what we're going to be speaking about today, who we are as WomanACT, and then I'll turn it over to Premila and our project advisors to speak more about kind of the actual learnings that we've been gathering through research on violence against older women. So Premila, if you just want to take it to the next slide. Thank you. So who we are. WomanACT is a policy and planning body that works to end violence against women and to advance gender equality through research, policy, educations, and systems coordination. We envision a world where all women and gender diverse people are safe and have equal access to opportunities. And as I mentioned, we do this by working collaboratively through coordination, research, policy, and education. I also just want to take a moment to acknowledge the land that WomanACT currently works on. We had that beautiful opening from Deborah Sedgwick that I really, really loved and helped us really kind of center and remind us what we're here to do today. But we also just want to add to that by acknowledging that WomanACT is based in Takaranto, which is now known as Toronto, a land that is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt. And it commemorates the continuous custodianship of this land by Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee nations. We recognize that this agreement and all other treaties invite all nations and settlers to care for this land. We also invite you to reflect on your own commitment and responsibility to all nations, to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and the present, and to consider how each in our own way can try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And we do want to acknowledge that some of the themes in our presentation today might be upsetting. So if you need a break at any point, please do take care of yourself. We will offer some supports in the chat, but particularly we acknowledge that the Assaulted Women's Helpline and the Senior Safety Line can be there for you if you are looking for further resources or counseling or support. Premila, if you could take us to the next slide, please. Thanks. So just to kind of give you an overview, what we're going to be speaking to you today about. So violence against older women, as I mentioned, has kind of been a research and policy area that only in the last few years, WomanACT has really delved deeper in. And before explaining and sharing some of those insights, I want to just kind of situate ourselves in a kind of our theoretical, our practice approach. I'm a researcher, so this is really just my chance to nerd out, but I think it's also important because it does help to kind of explain sort of what services and what solutions we want to put forward, we want to promote. So at WomanACT, we really do use a lens that focuses on gendered ageism. And so this means that we understand violence against women primarily through the lens of how age and gender inequality over a course of a lifetime can really shape how the barriers, the systemic barriers that older women have in terms of accessing services and supports, but also sort of how age and gender inequality shape the experiences of violence or abuse in later life, as well as how those two intersections shape their capacity or their choices to rebuild their lives on their own terms. Of course, we do recognize that there are a lot of other intersectionalities that will impact access to services, will impact the experiences of abuse. So, we've heard today a bit about the queer and gender diverse individuals, how race and ethnic identity, immigration status, disability, and religion can also shape those experiences. But we do want to, again, kind of at WomanACT, will kind of draw attention to age and gender inequality primarily. And I also want to note that, of course, when we speak of older women, this is such a broad term that, it's hard to, what one person can experience at 55 might look different for what someone at 85 will look like. So again, just kind of noting that there is a continuum in experience, and the insights we shared today are kind of some of the things we've heard about from survivors, but they won't reflect the experience that each individual survivor goes through. And so that really is about having conversation with a survivor and getting to know their specific needs. And we'll hear a little bit more about that later today. And then in just a note on language. So we do actually use terms older or mature survivor rather than senior. And even though we're speaking about people who are 55 or older, and the reason we do this is, again, to come from a place of age positivity and anti-ageism, and to recognize that age is, again, as I mentioned, on a continuum. And so older really just reflects that they are kind of at a later life stage in the continuum of aging, but that they aren't necessarily seniors, that they are empowered, that they have the capacity to live life on their own terms. Oh, no audio. If you're having the same problem as I did earlier, it might be because you have to join audio. There's a little button. I hope that works. Because can others hear me clearly? Okay, great. There, thanks, Laura. Yeah, I just realized you can't hear what I'm saying when I speak. Premila, if you would like to just change to the next slide. Thank you. So in today's presentation, again, WomanACT has really been focusing on kind of the economics of violence against women, how violence against older women has affected their financial security in later life, affected their ability to find employment. So we do just want to kind of take it back a little step and to sort of situate it with the broader economics, again, focusing on ageism and the impacts of gender equality. So I'll start with that context, and then we will get to hear our delightful Premila and project advisors to really get into showing what those experiences are like for them. Thanks, Premila. So I'm trying to kind of simplify this as best as I can, but when we kind of look at the broader economic context, it really is everything. It touches on income insecurity, touches us on employment, housing, health status, all of that. So we're just kind of really focusing on kind of the key takeaways. And we know that, over the lifetime, women will experience a gender wage gap. So we know in Canada that still to this day, women only make 87 cents to every dollar made by a man. But we also know that if you are a person who belongs to a marginalized group, for example, being Indigenous or identifying as Black or as an immigrant, you will experience a larger pay gap. And so, of course, the gender wage gap kind of persists over a lifetime, and then this leads to sort of a compound effect of having lowers pension or retirement income. And so for older women, most statistically, it's been shown that for older women who are 55 and older, they will make only 82 cents to every dollar earned by a retired man. So that's even less than the gender wage gap. And then we also know that a retired woman of color makes significantly less. So it's according to the Ontario Pay Equity Office, they will only earn about 63 cents for every dollar that a retired white man will make. And the reasons for this are diverse. We have the gender wage gap, but of course, there's also racial discrimination, gender discrimination. We also know that ageism can be a factor. So more and more adults are trying to delay retirement in order to save up. So for example, 68% of women aged 55 to 59, and then those 48% of women 60 to 64 years old will continue to participate in the labor force. But even though they, want to put themselves financially in a better position for retirement, or because they're not even able to retire, we still know that they experience ageism. We know from research that they may not be given as many training or education opportunities by their employers to be able to kind of upskill and to keep pace with the changing labor market. We have heard of ageism in terms of hiring discrimination, where workers will prefer to hire younger workers or people that are kind of between the 30 to 50 age bracket or recent graduates, just because they think that they will be more productive and have longer time in the workplace or the organization. And then, of course, we also know that caring continues to be a responsibility for older women, either caring for grandchildren, caring for adult children, or caring for a partner with illnesses or disabilities. The most employers don't actually account for kind of the accommodations that are needed in order to meet those caring demands that continue to persist for women across their lifespan. So these are just kind of the really high level economic factors. The one I forgot to mention is older women, but we can see here in terms of housing insecurity that older women are also more likely to be living in housing need. So according to the 2018 Canadian Housing Survey, most older women, 20% of older women spend about 30% of their income on housing. So if you factor in the retirement pension gap, you factor in the unaffordable housing, it really does put this kind of pressure on older women financially. And sometimes when that intersects with abuse, that has drastic consequences, as we'll hear more about today. So that's the really high level overview. I'm going to turn it over to Premila for the next portion of our presentation, which will focus more on some of, as I mentioned, the actual survivor impacts of that.
Thank you, Jane. For the next portion of our presentation, I have the joy to invite our project advisors to share insights as lived experts of intimate partner violence or family violence. Kate and Denise, thank you for being here. They will speak about the impacts of abuse on the financial security of older survivors, as well as the barriers to rebuilding financial security and the supports of older survivors in general for better economic security. Kate, I'll let you go first and talk about the impacts of abuse on financial security.
Thank you, Premila. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. A short introduction of myself. In my pursuit for justice, I find my calling in advocacy work for WomanACT, where I share my voice in projects that engage survivors of the oppressed and marginalized to transform policies and programs. I am a published author, a mixed media artist. I share my hope, courage, and resilience to give love, comfort, and encouragement to other survivors of gender-based violence. So that's a little bit about myself. May I start, Premila? Okay. In general, survivors of any age bear tremendous financial burdens as a result of abuse. These financial impacts can include the loss of employment or income because of trauma or sabotage by an abuser, the loss or inability to access financial resources and assets because of financial control by the abuser, housing insecurity because of survivors' diminished financial capacity, and the monumental legal fees from extended child custody or family law proceedings. We also want to acknowledge financial and economic abuse as a specific form of intimate partner violence or family violence that involve the control or diminishing of a person's income or assets. Financial abuse always, almost, happens with other forms of abuse. According to Statistics Canada, 1 in 10 adults over the age of 65 reported experiencing emotional or financial abuse by an intimate partner in the last 5 years. This number is probably higher because older adults may not report or able to report because of isolation, fear of triggering further abuse, or stigma and shame. Older women are more vulnerable to financial control and exploitation because of gender and ageism, beliefs about financial decision making. A WomanACT study of senior immigrant women experiencing economic abuse, service providers share that abusers did not believe that older immigrant women were able to manage money effectively or that they may not need money. In the same study, participants shared how older immigrant women lack of financial independence was associated with decreased connections. Survivors reported that they were not able to use anyone except for their abused spouses or family members. This leads to a vicious cycle of feeling even more dependent on the abuser and acts as a barrier to seeking help from social supports and services. Age can also heighten the mental and physical health effects of the abuse for older survivors. In Women's Act's Ages projects, survivors share how the older age made physical or emotional abuse more difficult to deal with and harder to bounce back from, and that there's a greater chance of getting hurt or worsening health conditions like diabetes or heart problems. Chronic mental health or health problems adds to older survivors' financial insecurity by preventing them from finding, maintaining jobs, which increases their dependence on abusers or financial or social support. We also heard from other survivors who experienced abuse after the age of 55. They enter an abusive relationship with considerable assets, like a house or a small business. However, financial abuse and the cost of legal fees accrued during separation proceedings have cost them their retirement money, and they are now at the age where it's impossible to start over. For example, personal savings, inheritance, credit all went toward paying legal fees to fight and maintain their personal assets. The catch-22 is that their personal assets can also prevent them from accessing services. One older survivor was denied temporary housing because they owned a house, while others did not meet the income threshold for legal aid. On top of all these individual impacts, it is important to keep in mind that the experiences of older survivors is always shaped by societal inequities, like the gender roles in the workplace or marriage, which have limited older generations access to income, employment, and banking services. We'll look a bit more about what some of these structural barriers are for mature survivors trying to rebuild their safety and security. And this has certainly has an impact in my own life. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. As Kate mentioned, many structural barriers limit older survivors' abilities to build financial security. And many of these structural barriers are also a risk factor from further harm and barriers to accessing other services and supports. I'll go just through 3 of these that we've heard from our multiple projects, and we're working with older survivors. So first is financial dependence. Some older survivors of intimate partner violence shared how long-term abuse restricted their abilities to gain the professional skills or to gain education. That means that it was very difficult to find a stable source of income in terms of employment and build financial security through employment. For example, a participant in our previous project, Ages, shared that she never had a career throughout her marriage and only worked part-time jobs. After being fully dependent on her abusive partner for a long period of time, figuring out how to navigate and gain skills for employment or how to navigate financial services and access finances that way was really challenging for her in her 60s. In our study on older immigrant women, they shared having added barriers to financial independence because of immigration policies and the migration experience in itself. So for example, parents and grandparents that are sponsored to come to Canada are financially dependent on their adult children for periods of time, and during that time they cannot access old age security or other financial supports. On top of this, the language barrier and lack of knowledge about Canadian systems are additional barriers for them to access financial independence or access support for their experiences of abuse. Abuse also often resulted in survivors' social ties or connections with friends and families being cut and added to their social isolation. In our current study on building financial security, all the survivors shared how friends and family members are at times their only source of financial economic support by providing housing or money, especially when they don't know what services or community agencies are out there to help them. When these social connections are limited or don't exist, this cuts access to financial support even further. So social isolation can also add to older survivors' depression, fear, and anxiety, making it even more difficult to find the energy to build financial security. And a lot of older survivors also mentioned their care responsibilities. So older women continue to disproportionately carry the burden of care, providing care to grandchildren, adult children, or intimate partner with health or mental health issues. Older women and older immigrant women in particular may experience economic abuse in the form of exploitation, where they are expected to provide childcare or house care for free, often to the point of exhaustion, or they're expected to follow through with this work in the context of threats. Older women often also experience emotional and verbal abuse along with the economic abuse as a way of exerting control. And outside of the household, employers do not often take into consideration the many caretaking responsibilities that women and older women have and offer little workplace accommodations for them. Survivors also discussed ageism in the workplace, or ageism when trying to find employment. So survivors shared how they believe ageist attitudes and perceptions affected their chances of being employed. They might be seen as overqualified and not worth the investment compared to younger candidates who workplaces see as easier to train or that they can train them for cheaper. Older survivors also shared how they are seen as the riskier option for employers because they're seen to be taking more sick days or personal days to address the effects of age or trauma. And again, this is the employer's perceptions. Some older survivors shared that they did use services like employment agencies or attended skill building programs to help them find a job. But most of the time, it only led to short-term job opportunities and not jobs that could bring a stable income or actually reflected their experience or skills, so not meaningful work. And a lot of survivors also mentioned the family law system. So settling property or legal disputes is very expensive for survivors. Older survivors spoke about how abusers used the family court system to continue to perpetuate family abuse, financial abuse, and create more financial precarity by dragging out settlement disputes. Older survivors also shared the pressure on them of losing financial assets at a later age when they are relying on it for pensions, and the pressure of not having as much time or opportunity to make up the loss. And many shared how they felt their settlements were meager compared to the further trauma and abuse that they endured in the family court system from lawyers and their abusers. There are also many other structural barriers that older survivors shared with WomanACT. This included inadequate benefit systems, the gap in services dedicated to addressing economic abuse, and racial discrimination. And I'll now pass it on to Denise to share more about specific support needs that we heard about.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I'm here as a mature female survivor of gender-based violence. I lost my job, my home, my marriage all in one day and ended up in a violence against women shelter. When I transitioned back into society, I was attending an online event just like this when I heard WomanACT's Executive Director, Jaime Mendoza, speak on a panel. And for the first time, I felt seen through my armor, my survival armor, and appreciated for the struggles that I was facing outside of home as a mature person. I later reached out to WomanACT in response to a call to those 55 plus with lived experience, with the hope that I could assist others in breaking down stigma and stereotypes that I faced as an older woman who lived with many years in domestic abuse. So today I have the pleasure to share WomanACT's insights on specific support needs through their engagement with older women. So how can community agencies and services help other older survivors gain financial freedom and security? It starts by recognizing that supports are needed in all areas of a mature survivor's life. WomanACT heard from mature survivors that financial security is really important to them, but it also takes a back seat when we are trying to deal with all the other effects of abuse, like trying to uphold our self-confidence, attending to our mental health well-being, our physical health, or caring for others in our immediate families, such as which was mentioned before, our children or grandchildren or another family member. It is important to recognize our needs are not all the same. Some women have been able to remain employed, while others, despite extensive education, professional skills, and experience like myself, have large gaps in employment history. The experience of ageism varies to different degrees, but it cannot be overlooked as a barrier we often face. Therefore, mature survivors need support in these 5 key areas, the first being access to healthcare. Older survivors fear not being able to access healthcare or dealing with the issues alone, especially if their abuser was also their primary caregiver. This fear is very real, and the need for access to healthcare could be a barrier for an older survivor to be independent. WomanACT found that some mature women may need assistance with healthcare needs, for example, acquiring prescribed medication or finding affordable assisted devices. Making sure older survivors have equitable access to health services is a priority. Another area is counseling and mental health support. Counseling is needed to address the long-term impacts of abuse on mental health, as well as the impact to lifelong relationships. Counseling or support groups can rebuild an older survivor's confidence, give them the skills to process the trauma, and begin to build a social support network with others who have similar experiences. Loneliness and depression can challenge mental health and post-traumatic growth, which comes to our third area, life skills and guidance. Due to dependency and isolation during abusive relationship, older survivors need support to rebuild independent skills. This could be inter or intrapersonal skills or navigating community services, such as the fourth area, financial skills, and legal advice. Advice on day-to-day financial management, banking, as well as wider financial planning, or legal advice after separation or around power of attorney is a crucial part of this too. Immigrant older survivors may require access to information about their immigration rights and wraparound services to address their intersecting needs of being a newcomer and victim of abuse. Employment support. This is the fifth area. While some people at my age, as we heard, are retired, few Canadians are retiring at 65 these days, let alone those impacted by gender-based violence. Mature survivors may need support accessing education or rebuilding skills if they have been away from the labor market, or upskilling to today's market, or obtaining guidance on how to address ageism to get meaningful employment for their skill set. For those that need it, digital literacy and computer skills, for example, can demonstrate to employers that older workers have necessary skills in today's evolving labor market. Brothers, coaching or support to address larger gaps on resumes to demonstrate to employers that we are engaged, reliable employees with an equity deserving group. Agencies and services working in this field also need to make sure that mature workers have access to long-term and stable job opportunities, as well as access to mentorship and sector networks like any other job applicants do. Now back to Premila to speak on community services engagement.
Thank you, Denise. So here are some concrete steps that community agencies and services can take to build economic and social inclusion of older survivors. So one, build leadership capacity. Older women, and especially mature survivors, have a lot of wisdom and knowledge and experience to give, but don't often find themselves represented in community programs or policies. Engage older women and survivors in the design and evaluation of services and programs, and facilitate opportunities for older survivors to share their stories of resilience and engage in public education campaigns. Secondly, representation. So services need outreach material that speak to older women. We heard from our survivors that outreach materials often don't include images that represent older women, and this was a barrier for them in terms of thinking whether they could access that service or not. Services also need to be culturally responsive to ethnic, cultural, and religious backgrounds of different older women. And thirdly, source of information. So older women, depending on their generation, are not often aware of services for them. So again, depending on their generation, they might have not grown up with the knowledge of support services for women, as violence was not talked about outside of the home. They also might know about not know about shelters, and that there is support out there. So we had a few recommendations from survivors in terms of how to reach them. So just having that knowledge that different generations access information differently, having effective outreach strategies through GPs and health services, for example, is important. And for older immigrant women to target community and religious organizations or places of worship. And lastly, so that was something that has been reflected in this symposium, cross-sectoral partnership and training. So to have more effective outreach strategy, agencies need to build relationships with other organizations that work with older women and survivors, such as community health organizations, mental health organizations, senior and elder abuse agencies, violence against women organizations, and LGBTQ+ agencies. Cross-sectoral partnership not only strengthens programming, but it also supports that intersectoral knowledge sharing and training, which is vital for any work with older survivors. And we'll have some time for questions, but we just wanted to put our contact details up. So we have a few reports available there, and we also have free online learning modules based on our previous projects with older survivors. And please follow us for new material based on this project in terms of financial security and older survivors as well.
Thank you so much, Premila and Jane, for the very informative presentation, and also to Denise and Kate for the resilience and power in sharing your story and going live on a webinar. I find your story is extremely impactful. So congratulations for coming to our webinar this afternoon. So I'm just looking here at the first question here. Oh, it's a thank you. Sorry, I have a hard time reading and talking. So an individual is just echoing exactly what I said. A special thank you to Kate, as well as Denise for being on our webinar this afternoon. Just checking the Q&A. Maybe Premila, I see here somebody's wanting to know if you could maybe elaborate more on some barriers that older women face. You touched on that, but they're looking for a little bit more of a deeper dive on those how those barriers look different than younger generations leaving an IPV relationship.
Yeah, so something that we actually kind of heard from some of the older survivors that we've been working with is in terms of kind of health issues or mobility issues as well. So again, not all older survivors are homogenous, but that's kind of one barrier that might be different from younger women, depending on their circumstances. The other one that was mentioned was the impact of isolation. So a lot of older survivors talked about isolation in a very different way from younger generation. There's a lot of fear about seeking services, about just even the trip to the services that I don't think younger survivors have. And also that isolation does have the way they talked about it also has an impact in terms of their decision making. So I think a lot of older survivors would rather kind of stay in abusive relationships because at an older age, they don't have any other networks like that. That's their only support. And they don't have as many opportunities to, I guess, increase their social network. So the way that they were kind of talking about these things were very different from younger survivors. I think those are one of the two main ones that I can think of. Jane, can you think of other? I'm probably missing out a few, but yeah,
No,
those are the main ones that come to mind.
I think those are the main ones. I also just want to note that we do have an infographic that kind of speaks, or kind of does an overview of those risk factors and barriers. I think the other one, I think we've mentioned it a bunch of time in today, is ageism, but I think again and again, something we do keep seeing coming up in our work with survivors is really the impact, and it can't be understated how ageism, impacts their ability to access healthcare services. It can impact their ability to find employment, especially when we're trying to kind of rebuild, when they're trying to rebuild after experiencing a lifetime of not having financial security, having gaps, that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think our survivors, I think what Premila has mentioned today are kind of really highlighted those risk factors. And I think it does just look a little bit differently for each survivor. But I think what we've heard is pretty reflective of what we've been hearing across the board from the survivors that we've been speaking to.
There's a really valid comment here in the Q&A. Somebody's indicated that most older survivors may also feel as though they're not smart or educated enough to make it on their own. And I think this is a really important way to end off this session today, that when we're speaking about intimate partner violence or gender-based violence, that we need to rest on the fact that a lot of women are going to choose to stay in that relationship. Before we close out, can we just close out, Jane or Premila, with just a couple safety tips that if somebody here online watching this session can implement in their life to stay a little bit safer than they were yesterday?
So I would actually want to highlight, there's a number of safety planning tools that you can access online. So we actually have one that kind of talks more about service providers, but you can find it on our website or their online learning modules. because I probably won't be able to go through all of them, but I would just say that there are online tools for safety planning. There's iDetermine CA. I'm just going to put it in there.
I want to say METRAC and EAPO have their own, which is also another really great safety planning tool. I'll see if I can pull it up online, or you might have it handy, Laura.
I do. You can just go to our website. I've just put it in the chat and search our resources, and there's a safety planning toolkit, and you have a really great one too, which I've connected individuals to.
And yeah, and just to let you know, like what a safety planning tool is it'll ask you questions about known risk factors, and then it'll just help you make a plan around those. And that can just help you kind of, if you need to react quickly, if you need resources quickly, if you need to find something quickly in an emergency, that kind of helps you be a bit pre-planned for those situations.
Wonderful. Well, I think a really great way to end today's session on highlighting the importance of safety. Again, thank you so much for attending today's session, and everything will be uploaded and recorded within a few days of our conference. So thank you once again, everyone, and have a good rest of your day. Bye.